Okay, so this is being recorded Christmas Day, 2010. Paper was handed in November 22nd, 2010. Alice in Carrol-Land, the use of logic in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. It would be difficult to properly describe the dimensions of Wonderland without referring to the surreal, which revels in uninhibited exploration of the psyche, nonsense literature, and dreams. Early surrealists developed the practice of automatic writing, a stream of consciousness exercise in which thoughts are not censored. This has significance to Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland because Alice wakes up as if from a dream in both Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, which sets the stage for odd and inexplicable events to occur. Additionally, when Carroll first relayed the tale to the Liddell sisters, he simply said the first thing that came into his head. This suggests a stream of consciousness not weighed down with the coherent, intellectual, and deliberate portion of the tale. However, Carroll was also a fan of logical pursuits and factual matters such as mathematics. The books he has published as Charles Dodgson attest to this. This combination of the real and surreal, logic and illogic, culminates in the dreamlike world of Wonderland, where Alice must use logical reasoning as a lifeline to surpass all the predicaments the surreal world imposes on her. Critic Roger Holmes states, "The delight afforded by Lewis Carroll is rare and brilliant and inexhaustible." But why is this so? The tale is full of anxiety, misunderstanding, and an air of chaos. Sense is turned on its head by the residents of Wonderland, and only Alice attempts to have proper manners, according to Victorian conventions. Some may argue that this points to the need to erase outdated and unnecessary social conventions, but beset by irrational, surreal forces on all sides, Alice must use these conventions as a lifeline to bring her stability in a world that quite literally slips out from under her. The world Alice inhabits is full of confusion and lacks any form of reliable etiquette. Instead, it is haunted by irrational impositions, suggesting a dreamlike state. For example, in the Tea Party episode, the Mad Hatter personifies time to an extreme extent, saying, "I dare say you never even spoke to time." This is one of the portmanteau words essayist John Skinner speaks of, which has more than one meaning and telescopes several ideas into one word. Alice responds to the Mad Hatter by saying, "I know I have to beat time when I learn music." The Mad Hatter replies, "If only you kept on good terms with him, he'd do almost anything you liked with the clock." This passage reflects the fantastical and surreal world of Wonderland, where it is always tea time, and where loss of time also represents loss of structure and order and essentially rationality. Alice's inability to share the Mad Hatter's personification of time allows her to keep control through her logical statement, although her conversation with the Mad Hatter is continuously surreal. Riddles and oddities form the basis of this conversation, as many others, but even though they confuse poor Alice, she retains her sense of propriety as a shield against Wonderland's supreme surrealism, such as when she decides this piece of rudeness was more than Alice could bear. She walked off. This passage shows Alice's contentious nature and her refusal to succumb to the disorder of the surreal. The mysteries of the Mad Hatter's statements are complex riddles, having many multiple semantic, syntactic, and contextual meanings. Alice would like to solve riddles or impose logic on an enigmatic statement when she states, "I'm glad they began asking riddles," but when the Tea Party acts as a phonetic labyrinth, not solvable by her notion of reality, she departs. Unfortunately, she travels down a path that leads her rational mind to a more formidable opponent, the Red Queen. The threatening tone of the tale is heightened with the arrival of the Red Queen. All of her guards fear her and her proclivity for death sentences.
Proclivity, what a nice word.
I know, I like that one too. As when Alice overhears them saying, "If the Queen was to find out, we should all have our heads cut off, you know." Because of the Queen's seeming omnipotence and fearsome disposition, she can be seen as representing irrational rage, anger, and jealousy, strong negative emotions that hide in the psyche. For example, she turned crimson with fury and like a wild beast began screaming at the slightest provocation from Alice. This extremity of emotion represents it in its entirety, and indeed, the Red Queen does not seem to have any other emotion. Despite the anxiety the Queen creates, Alice thinks to herself logically, which allows her to protect herself from her own fear. "Why, they're only a pack of cards, after all," she says. "I needn't be afraid of them." Logic tells her there is nothing to fear, but the surreal nature of Wonderland lends itself to a constant struggle for rationality. Alice's practicality allows her to remain composed in the Queen's company, albeit with difficulty, and she only begins to be deeply frightened with the departure of the Duchess. The Duchess's favorite word is moral. Hence, she symbolizes, to some extent, the importance of morality. However, she instantly departs in the face of the Queen's threats. Either you or your head must be off. Take your choice. The Duchess was gone in a moment. If the Duchess represents morality, however skewed her particular morals are, and the Queen represents insensate rage, then this passage reflects the hasty departure of morality that can occur in a swell of deep psychotic anger. Alice is much too frightened at this point, but remains with the Queen until she departs, suggesting that one must attempt to remain stable until the rage recedes. Alice's sensibility is not only inflicted on from outside forces, such as the Mad Hatter and the Red Queen, but her cognitive skills are also deeply reduced in Wonderland. Much to Alice's chagrin, once she enters Wonderland, she is unable to remember much of anything, including simple childhood rhymes. Edmund Wilson describes this phenomenon as merciless irreverence, in which bottoms dismayingly drop out of poems. Simple and trite images are replaced by grotesque and silly ones, which have rushed in to take possession. Alice notices this almost instantly, and becomes upset as she begins to test her memory. I'm sure those are not the right words, and her eyes filled with tears. This passage shows her inability to remember as a source of anxiety that heightens the sense of struggle and tension, and once again suggests the dreamlike, surreal nature of Wonderland. The humorous rhymes that replace the originals often have a violent undertone, such as the Mouse's poem that states, "Said cunning old fury, I'll condemn you to death," which suggests adverse emotions often lurk in the gray area of psyche between reality and dream. These nonsense poems...
I like that too. Yeah.
These nonsense poems are also a testament to Carol's capabilities at seamlessly interweaving a surreal world with logical sentiments, a task Alice is forced to, sometimes discourteously, undertake in Wonderland. Alice sometimes comes across as rude in Wonderland, and is unable to follow the conventions of this bizarre society. For example, she begins to speak to a talking mouse about a dog that catches rats, saying, "It kills all the rats, and oh dear, I'm afraid I've offended the mouse again." This, once again, highlights the struggle inherent in dealing with the strange and unpredictable. If Wonderland is a dream world, or a subconscious representation of the mind, then Alice's lack of tact is excusable as a young girl who is attempting to fight her way past the irrational obstacles that Wonderland throws at her. Her only option is to follow her own social conventions in a decisive manner, as when the tea partiers shout there is no room, and she responds by saying there is plenty of room, and sits down. Therefore, Alice does not let herself be unduly influenced by the nature of the irrational, whether it results in physical or mental dismay. If Wonderland represents a mental journey as well as a physical one, then Alice is not just moving past the impediments that ravage Wonderland, she is being mentally affected by them as well. Many critics say that Alice's journey represents her quest to womanhood. Certainly, she changes many times physically when eating or drinking anything in that dream world. More important than growing up physically, however, is Alice's mental development. She begins quite unsure of her path in the surreal setting of Wonderland, but with the arrival of the caterpillar who constantly questions Alice, she begins to think for herself. "Who are you?" the caterpillar asks, and although she cannot produce a definitive answer, this enigmatic nature forces her to irrationally consider problems that arise, like which side of the mushroom to eat, therefore encouraging her to think for herself. Alice remained looking thoughtfully at the mushroom for a minute, and as a result, she logically comes to a solution by assigning sections of the mushroom to their own pocket. Ta-da! This passage represents the power of logical thought in the face of illogical absurdity, and shows how Alice must continue to use the logic of her own world to contend with the irregularities of Wonderland. The Cheshire Cat is a similarly cryptic creature, providing Alice with non sequiturs such as, "A dog's not mad, therefore, I am mad." and other ambiguous statements, but nonetheless, he provides information that allows Alice to ponder which path she will take. If the caterpillar statements strongly encourage Alice to question herself, then the Cheshire Cat allows her to question her ludicrous surroundings. He does not appear to be affected by the Queen's anger and the King's remarks towards him, and as Alice confides in him, she feels very glad she had someone to listen to her. This interaction appears to be a source of strength to Alice, as the cat's distance from the Queen's craziness seems to give her distance from the outlandish happenings as well, and as a result, she is much more outspoken, such as when she argues with the Griffin. "I never said I didn't," interrupted Alice. This assertion of her logic-driven capabilities culminates in the Red Queen's court, where Alice begins to question the Queen's authority with force. "Stuff and nonsense," said Alice loudly to the Queen. "The idea of having the sentence first." The refusal to acquiesce to the Queen, and ultimately Wonderland's social conventions, immediately precedes Alice's awakening, suggesting the success of her use of logic on the surreal nature of Wonderland. Wonderland can be seen as a Bildungsroman setting for Alice, forcing her to assert her logical reality over the surreal nature of the dreamlike world, and as a consequence become more confident about her mental capacity. This act of irrational imposition on the irrational shows the struggle that can occur in any human being. As Lewis Carroll states in his diary, "When we are dreaming, do we not say and do things that in waking life would be insane?" Consequently, we can see that Wonderland is not solely a world for Alice to traverse, but a spectacle that allows the reader to question the subconscious and surreal within themselves, suggesting logic and reasoning should and will always have a place when forming coherence of the mind.
Yay!